The committee will come to order. We welcome you this afternoon. We want to thank everybody for joining us today. Looks like we have a terrific turnout, about a dozen members so far. We're holding this hearing virtually today in compliance with the regulations for remote committee proceedings pursuant to House Resolution 965. This authority has allowed us to continue to do our work on behalf of the American people while keeping our staff, families, and the broader community safe. While we all have started to become familiar with navigating this technology, more or less, I do want to remind members of a few procedures. First, consistent with the regulations, the committee will keep microphones muted to limit background noise. Members are responsible for unmuting themselves when they seek recognition or when they're recognized for their 5 minutes. Second, members and witnesses must have their cameras on at all times. If you need to step away from the proceedings, please leave your camera on rather than logging out. Today, the Trade Subcommittee is holding a hearing on the Caribbean Basin Trade Partnership Act, Considerations for Renewal. Today marks the second virtual hearing for the Trade Subcommittee and the first hearing we are holding on the Caribbean in this Congress. I want to express my deep appreciation for Representatives Sewell and Weintraub for taking a leadership role in this program. Last year, they introduced a bill to reauthorize the Caribbean Basin Trade Partnership Act, which expires at the end of the month, and have been instrumental in organizing this hearing. In today's political climate, it is important to highlight areas of bipartisan consensus. The Cptpa has historically enjoyed that bipartisan and bicameral support, in part because of the shared history and close ties the United States has had with the Caribbean region. About 13 million Americans have Caribbean ancestry and represent about 4% of the American population. The Caribbean, in particular Haiti, played a critical role in the American Revolutionary War when hundreds of Haitians fought for America's independence. And years later, Haiti would defeat the French and become the first Black republic, influencing the rise of abolitionist and anti-colonial movements all over the world, including in the United States. Haiti's sacrifices and unyielding resolve continue to inspire millions. But sadly, the United States, under the influence of slaveholding interests, actively worked against this new republic. They were threatened by the specter of a slave uprising and Black independent governance. The United States was too often hostile to Haiti and undermined its efforts. Rather than be a constructive partner to help this fledgling republic, the United States interfered and, more importantly, failed to embrace the emergence of the first Black republic. There are admitted problems of governance, poverty, and corruption, but I believe some of the difficulties that Haiti experiences to this day are the result of a failure in American policy in the past. That's why the Caribbean Basin Initiative is so important. It's an opportunity to help strengthen Haiti's economy and our working relationship. In 2010, after the devastating earthquake, I joined a bipartisan, bicameral delegation to Port-au-Prince to demonstrate the ongoing support of Congress to the Haitian people and our commitment to work with the Haitian government to assist with reconstruction efforts. It is impossible to describe that devastation. Haiti is by design the primary beneficiary of the textile and apparel preferences under Cbtpa. I'm looking forward to hearing firsthand the impact the program has had on the country. I'm also eager to better understand some of the challenges, especially those related to labor and worker rights facing the country, especially in a time of COVID-19. While the Cptpa, in addition to other preference programs in the region, have helped to create thousands of jobs and opportunities for workers and businesses in both the United States and the Caribbean, development challenges continue to persist in the region. Like any good trading relationship, this one requires work on both sides. work to improve labor conditions, political stability, and expand economic development to all countries in the region. As we consider the reauthorization of the program, it's important to evaluate its effectiveness in stimulating economic growth and in achieving broader development goals across various metrics. Exports from the Caribbean have increased for a second consecutive year in 2018. However, our preference program continues to be underutilized across different product categories and by various beneficiary countries. It is my hope that this hearing will shed light on some of the impediments to broader utilization of the program, spark development challenges facing the region, and spark a conversation on how best to tackle these challenges together in a manner that harnesses trade and development as we renew Cptpa. And with that, I would like to recognize the ranking member, Mr. Buchanan, for his opening statement.
Can you hear me all right, Mr. Chairman?
I can indeed, sir. Welcome. Glad to have you.
Right. Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this timely and bipartisan hearing. Preference programs have been an important part of the U.S. trade and development policy for more than 4 decades. With the preferences for the Caribbean Basin set to expire in less than 3 weeks, this hearing is an important opportunity to focus on why these programs and Cbtpa in particular serves a range of U.S. interests, including by raising standards to beneficiary countries and providing affordable access to U.S. businesses and consumers to goods that they need. And I also want to thank our witnesses for them taking their time to be here today. As a member representing Florida, which I serve as the gateway, Florida serves as a gateway to the Caribbean, I'm keenly aware of the importance of our relationship with our neighbors in the Caribbean Basin. These countries may not have the largest economies, but 5 out of the 8 of them are in the top 50 export markets for Florida. Florida exports around $400 million of goods to Haiti alone each year. Overall, the United States exports over $9 billion to the region with a trade surplus of over $4 billion. American is stronger when we work closely together with our regional partners to raise standards and improve our competitiveness. Our preference programs, including Cptpa, are important tools towards this end. I'm eager to hear details from our witnesses about how the program advances U.S. interest in the region. In my view, all of our preference programs clearly serve the interests of the United States in several ways. First, they advance our interest in helping developing countries grow and create more opportunities for their local workers and entrepreneurs in a pro-market way. Second, preference programs help export our values and raise standards through the enforcement of eligibility criteria such as protecting international recognized workers' rights, providing fair market access to U.S. exporters, and respecting intellectual properties. Access to preference is an important incentive for our trading partners to respect these principles or risk jeopardizing their benefits, as they know that adopting these standards make it more attractive to them, to investors, and also growth opportunities. Third, preference programs serve our interest by providing American consumers and business access to goods they need at competitive prices thanks to the tariff savings. Moreover, in the case of Cptpa, U.S. cotton, yarn, and textile producers benefit from the rule of origin that requires use of U.S. input to qualify those benefits. My background in business, and I know well from what my business over the years, is dependent on minimizing uncertainty. Uncertainty is compounded by COVID-19 for many of my constituents and their partners and our partners in the developing countries as they seek to make a solid long-term business decisions. When we as policymakers reduce uncertainty, we help businesses take risk and make decisions, especially in terms of long-term investments. Renewing the programs this month before it expires is a smart, common sense way to reduce uncertainty both for Americans who rely on programs to support exports of cotton and yarn, as well as those who rely on integrated supply chains to provide apparel and other finished goods at a competitive price. Uncertainty about if and when Cbtpa will be renewed is not good for jobs in America either, or our beneficial countries, nor would it advance our development goals. For similar reasons, I strongly support renewing the GSP at the same time that we renew Cbtpa. GSP is our largest and oldest preference program with 119 beneficiary developing countries around the world. In 2019, Americans saved more than $1 billion of their hard-earned money, including almost $40 million in my home state of Florida, thanks to GSP. GSP is set to expire in only 3 months after Cbtpa. And given our recess at the end of the month for elections and uncertainty of the lame duck session, GSP expiration is effectively the same time right now as Cbtpa. Renewing GSP now would reduce an uncertainty and support jobs at American companies that rely on programs, many of which are small businesses. Mr. Chairman, I'm glad to say that this is not a partisan issue. I know that we both support our preference programs and want to protect the value that they bring both for Americans and for our partners in beneficiary countries. Let's work together to renew both Cptpa and GSP in the very near future. Thank you again, Mr. Chairman, for calling this important hearing. I look forward to the testimony from all of the witnesses today. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you very much, Congressman Buchanan. I appreciate, as always, the perspective that you bring, especially as it relates to your state of Florida, providing context. It's very important. Without objection, all members' opening statements will be made a part of the record. We have today a distinguished panel of witnesses to discuss policies to develop robust and resilient supply chains. I would like to first welcome, and we're honored to have, the Ambassador of Haiti to the United States, Hervé Denay. Mr. Ambassador, welcome. You honor us with your presence, and we're looking forward to your presentation. And then we will hear from George Sassine, a board member and former president of the Association of Haitian Industries, also known by its French acronym ADIH. Then we will have, following, Ms. Lauren Stewart, the Regional Program Director for the Americas for the Solidarity Center. Then we will hear an alumni staff member, Ms. Beth Balson, President of the American Phoenix Trade Advisory Services. And then following will be Mr. Jerry Cook, Vice President of Government and Trade Relations for Hanes Brands Incorporated. Each of your statements will be made part of the record in its entirety, but I would ask if you could summarize your testimony in 5 minutes or less. Mr. Ambassador, would you be kind enough to lead us off?
Thank you, Chairman Buchanan, and thanks for the kind word to my countries. Good afternoon, honorable members of Congress, to co-panelists and viewers. My name is Earl Dennis. I serve as the Republic of Haiti's ambassador to the United States of America. First, I wish to express my deepest gratitude to the President of Haiti, His Excellency Jovenel Moïse, the Haitian government, and my staff at the embassy here in Washington. Second, thanks to my esteemed colleague at the CARICOM who worked relentlessly on the extension of the Caribbean Basin Economic Recovery Act, CBRA, HR 991. Chairman Earl Blumenauer and Ranking Member Fern Buchanan, thank you for holding today's hearings and for the opportunity to testify before the Subcommittee on Trade. I want also to express my profound thanks to the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, the Honorable Richard Neal, Congresswoman Terry Earl, for introducing the legislation, members of the committee, and the Congressional Black Caucus members. Lastly, to staffer Alexandra Whitaker, Robert Nuttall, and countless others, thank you for working closely with the embassy. As a 30-plus year career diplomat, my tour in Washington, D.C. has been one of the most rewarding due to my role in strengthening bilateral relations between two of the oldest republics in the Americas and fostering inclusive development. Today's testimony seeks to express the importance of passing H.R. 991 before its expiration date, September 30, 2020. For almost 2 years, the government of Haiti has been working with CARICOM ambassadors, Association of Industry of Haiti, NGOs, think tanks, and U.S. manufacturing companies to lobby Congress to pass this critical bicameral and bipartisan piece of legislation. The effort of the Haitian diaspora have not gone unnoticed. I am immensely grateful to their support. The Caribbean Basin Trade Partnership Act, Cbtpa, provision gives duty-free eligibility for textile and apparel made from U.S. yarns and fabrics, enabling eligible countries to compete with China and other Asian apparel suppliers. Such provision, among many others, benefits help sustain U.S. yarn production and encourage further investment in the sectors. For example, investment by Mass Holding and Everest Textile in North Carolina alone in 2016 and 2017 have created roughly 4,000 new American jobs that are producing input for Cbtpa eligible apparel made in Haiti. Countries such as Barbados, Belize, Curaçao, Guyana, Jamaica, St. Lucia, and Trinidad and Tobago benefit from this provision. According to the 13th report to Congress on the operation of the CBRA in 2018, the U.S. enjoyed a healthy trade surplus of $7.4 billion with CBI countries for a total good trade with those countries of $19.4 billion. The Republic of Haiti's garment industries is the industrial foundation of the country's economy, and its existence depends on the preference granted under Cbtpa and the additional Hope Health programs. According to ADI, the industry, which provides direct employment to almost 60,000 workers yearly this year, was already beginning to suffer from the delays in the Cbtpa's renewal before the coronavirus outbreak. Buyers and investors were hesitant to make new commitments while the program's future remained uncertain. The country was already losing jobs at the end of 2019, well before buyers and retailers began canceling orders in response to the pandemic. The unfortunate reality is that the demand for the apparel has gone down, and the potential buyers who are still capable of placing orders are not willing to commit it until Congress renews Cbtpa before its expiration date. Haiti's garment industry's future, and thus the job and economic sustainability for many Haitian families, remain in jeopardy until the legislation passes. Cbtpa will play a crucial role in making the supply chain from PPE and textile stronger in response to COVID-19, which will make America less dependent on nations outside of the Western Hemisphere. Also, with the issue regarding China, Haiti hopes and expects to benefit from the nearshoring concept introduced by Congress. In closing, I humbly urge the United States Congress to pass H.R. 991 before September 30, 2020 for the following reason. 1, to reaffirm Cbtpa. 2, to boost Haiti's manufacturing and assembly sectors. 3, to create security stability in the country and the region. 4, to decrease migration. And 5, to foster US-Haiti partnership. Honorable members, thank you for your time and your commitment to the Republic of Haiti and the Caribbean region. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Mr. Ambassador. We are again honored by your presence and appreciate your comments. Now, Mr. Sassine, would you please begin?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman Blumenauer, Ranking Member Buchanan, members of the subcommittee. I am Georges Sassine, and I am testifying on behalf of the Association des Industries d'Haïti, ADI, which is the largest private sector organization in Haiti and which represents the apparel manufacturers in our country. Our members are appreciative of the fact that you have called this hearing and given us the opportunity to testify before the subcommittee. I can tell you that for our apparel sector and for numerous U.S. textile and apparel companies, the renewal of the Caribbean Basin Trade Partnership Act is an urgent matter critical to the future of our sector. In turn, our sector is vital to the economy of Haiti and to its population. The apparel industry, at least before the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, employed over 55,000 Haitians and accounted for about $1 billion in exports, almost all of it going to the United States. Apparel accounts for over 90% of Haiti's total exports. It also supports the existence of the logistics and trade services critical to our economy. For a country that has faced immense political and economic challenges, we can clearly see that without a vibrant and growing apparel sector, Haiti's already fragile economy will weaken further. Mr. Chairman, the trade preference arrangements governing Haiti's access to the United States have been carefully crafted by the Congress over the last 2 decades. As you know, the Caribbean Basin Trade Partnership Act, Cbtpa of 2000, added some apparel benefits to the Caribbean Basin Initiative, CBI, first implemented in 1984. The apparel program, established initially for 10 years and renewed by Congress in 2010, allows Haiti duty-free access to the U.S. market for apparel made from U.S. yarn, which largely consists of U.S.-grown cotton. This represents a win-win scenario, and that is why the renewal of this program is supported by the U.S. National Cotton Council and the National Council of Textile Organizations. As you might appreciate, certainty is extremely important to investors and users of the program. We have seen some lost orders and investment over the last year due to the lack of certainty about the renewal of Cbtpa. For example, some have noted that the Generalized System of Preferences, GSP, has often expired before it was renewed and question if the same would not happen to Cbtpa. Since Cptpa is permanent, orders have bypassed Haiti for some of those countries or stayed in Asia as investors wait to see if Congress will reauthorize Cbtpa. The other program that Congress has enacted that provides duty-free access for Haitian apparel, known as the Hope Help legislation, was put in place through laws in 2006, 8, 10, and renewed in 2015 until 2025. So it is not the subject of today's hearing, but it is important to point out that provisions of the Hope Help program were developed on the foundation of the Cbtpa program, and if Cbtpa is allowed to expire, it will create massive administrative problems for our manufacturers and U.S. buyers, potentially eliminate duty-free entry for certain Haitian apparel, and severely limit the potential expansion of Haiti's apparel sector going forward, as well as harm U.S. yarn and fabric manufacturers. Mr. Chairman, one of the most important things about the renewal of Cbtpa by the Congress is the assurance it will provide to potential investors in Haiti that the country's access to the U.S. market will be maintained. This will come at a time when the apparel industry has suffered an enormous blow from the impact of the pandemic. U.S. imports of apparel from Haiti are down in value by some 35% this year through July as compared to 2019. At the same time, and I want to emphasize this point, we see great opportunity on the horizon if Cbtpa is renewed. Before the pandemic, as I mentioned, we had finally reached $1 billion in exports. I have been working to support and expand the industry for 2 decades since Cbtpa was first enacted. It was a point of pride that we finally passed that threshold, and we were seeing greater interest from investors to come to Haiti, both because we offer an attractive production platform and because of the renewed focus on nearshoring and hemispheric production. Mr. Chairman, I again want to thank you and the subcommittee for taking the time to consider the needs of Haiti for Cbtpa renewal to maintain our U.S. trade access framework. I look forward to the day when our country can join in the type of free trade agreement that the Dominican Republic and the countries of Central America have with the United States, so that, like them, we no longer must rely upon the Cbtpa program. But in order for that day to come, we must once again ask the Congress of the United States to urgently renew Cbtpa before its expiration this month. And I thank you.
Ms. Stewart, would you please begin?
Absolutely, thank you. Chairman Blumenauer, Ranking Member Buchanan, and distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for your leadership and for the opportunity to discuss the labor rights situation in Haiti's garment industry, especially as you consider the renewal of the Caribbean Basin Trade Partnership Act, or Cbtpa. Today, I represent the Solidarity Center, which is the largest US-based international worker rights organization. We have programs in approximately 60 countries, including Haiti. As the Solidarity Center's regional program director for the Americas, and in my previous role as the senior program officer for Haiti, I worked alongside and continue to closely engage with a number of independent Haitian trade unions that represent thousands of workers across the garment sector. These workers produce goods, primarily t-shirts and other apparel, which gain duty-free access to the US market under the Cbtpa and other important trade preference programs. These programs are indeed important for Haiti's economy. They've stimulated the garment industry and also generated formal employment. However, it is imperative to note that formal sector job creation has not been synonymous with greater access to decent work, and that the economic gains of the garment industry have not translated into family-supporting wages, safe workplaces free of hazards or sexual harassment, or an end to illegal practices that rob workers of their hard-earned healthcare and Social Security benefits. From a labor perspective, poor working conditions and low wages continue to characterize the sector. The Solidarity Center estimates the minimum wage for garment workers in Port-au-Prince to be at least 3 times lower than the basic cost of living. Our union partners report that minimum wage earners in Port-au-Prince exhaust half of their daily earnings on transportation to and from work and a modest lunch to sustain their labor. The Solidarity Center is aware of only one authentic collective bargaining agreement in the entire sector, which means that the majority of workers are unable to negotiate higher wages, and they lack a voice in shaping the terms of their labor. In addition to low wages and poor working conditions, rights violations abound, as does widespread and persistent noncompliance with national labor laws and internationally recognized worker rights, which is among the criteria for Cbtpa eligibility. In its 2019 Human Rights Report for Haiti, the State Department noted that penalties for violations were not sufficient to deter violations and that the government did not effectively enforce the law. The Better Work program in Haiti, which is a joint initiative between the International Labor Organization and the International Finance Corporation, issues a report every 6 months on factory-level compliance. These reports show continual and high rates of noncompliance. Better Work has issued 20 reports over the past decade. In 13 of these 20 reports, 100% of garment factories were found to be in violation of one or more health and safety standards. In addition to health and safety violations, ongoing noncompliance related to health insurance and Social Security benefits is particularly egregious. In fact, in the past 2 months, at least 2 workers have died after being denied medical care that they paid for through payroll deductions, which their employers neglected to remit to the health insurance agency in accordance with the law. As a result, Sandra Renee, who's pictured here, a 30-year-old woman who was 6 months pregnant with her first child, was reportedly denied health care when she sought treatment for pregnancy complications. Her family says the hospital told her that insufficient funds had been accrued on her behalf, even though her employer, Palm Apparel, had been deducting health insurance contributions from her wages for the past 10 years. Unable to afford the $600 cost of care, Sandra and her unborn child tragically died days later. Lionel Pierre, who worked at the Sewing International factory, also known as CISA, recently suffered the same fate after reportedly being denied critical dialysis treatment. These 2 factories employ more than 3,500 workers in total and produce T-shirts for Guild and Activewear. According to the most recent Better Work report published in April 2020, neither factory had remedied its violations related to health insurance in more than the 3 years since these infractions were identified. These types of violations are common across factories and have devastating consequences for workers, especially in the era of COVID. Our union partners observe that in order for benefits of trade to reach the some 57,000 workers in the garment industry, labor rights provisions set forth in trade preference programs must be respected and enforced. These conditions are critical to guaranteeing worker rights and fostering the rule of law, both of which are necessary to promote stability, economic development, and democracy in Haiti. I look forward to sharing additional details and answering any questions that you may have. Thank you again for your leadership and the opportunity to speak to these issues.
Thank you very much, Ms. Stewart. We really appreciate that. Now we'll turn to our Alumni Association member, Ms. Baltzen. Welcome back to the committee.
Thank you so much, Chairman Blumenauer. It's an honor to be here today and to testify before the subcommittee. Preference programs have been a cornerstone of the American commitment to development for many decades. It was my good fortune to staff Mr. Rangel when we last considered preference program renewal in 2015. I was also the preference program lawyer when I was at USTR. With the expiry of some of these programs on the horizon, Congress has the opportunity to take a holistic view of the way the programs might be improved. When we look at the discussion in the 60s and 70s that led to the creation of these programs, it's clear that we believed at the time that promoting investment in beneficiary countries and providing duty-free treatment for their exports was itself a development policy. The criteria generally reflect this mindset. Today, we're revisiting many of our assumptions. Reflecting on the pandemic, the Financial Times editorial board contends that we must reconsider the economic guideposts of the past 4 decades and places the discussion in the context of a new social contract. Multinational corporations themselves are acknowledging the importance of shifting to a model of stakeholder capitalism. This is an inherent recognition that investment on its own may handsomely reward shareholders, but not necessarily workers or the environment. The prevalence of share buybacks in recent times emphasizes the point. As the business community recognizes that investment alone is not enough to create inclusive prosperity, it's appropriate to review our program criteria to see if they can be updated to reflect our evolved thinking, and to do still more to promote development in beneficiaries. Researchers have shown that one of the best ways to do that is to foster a thriving middle class in those countries. The following are suggestions that would orient the programs in that direction. First, support robust labor rules. These rules are sometimes seen as an imposition by the United States on developing countries, but ensuring that workers are appropriately compensated for their efforts is an essential component of promoting a middle class. 2, target economic inequality. We usually focus on whether per capita metrics, such as gross national income, are increasing. But that doesn't tell us whether most of the benefits of enhanced wealth are concentrated in the hands of a few. Nobel laureate Amartya Sen has commented that Bangladesh does a better job than wealthier neighbor India of addressing inequality within the country. A basket of metrics, including life expectancy and the Gini coefficient, might be useful. 3, promote competition within beneficiaries. Consistent with furthering equitable development, we should do more to ensure that the benefits of trade don't flow to a small subset of industrial oligarchs within a particular beneficiary. We might consider a competition criterion. 4, promote competition across beneficiaries. The program is designed to provide tariff preferences to enable countries to compete. Provides for removal of benefits for a particular product if a country is competitive with respect to that product. Enforcing this provision more strictly would give other beneficiaries the chance to become competitive themselves. 5, ensure that any product expansions will actually benefit the countries. This was a challenge when programs were reconsidered in 2015. Often there's a push for product expansion because businesses are interested in the tariff benefits, but there is rarely evidence of any concrete effort to create meaningful jobs. 6, resist relaxing rules of origin. When preference renewal comes up, there's usually a push to relax these rules, but they're designed to promote real manufacturing in these countries, not for these countries to act as transshipment points for non-beneficiaries. At the same time, it's worth examining whether rules of origin can do more to promote regional integration among the beneficiaries. 7, adopt an environment criterion. As with labor, an environment criterion is often viewed as an imposition. It's just the opposite. The United States should not be creating incentives to export polluting industries to developing countries. Mr. Doggett proposed a modest environment criterion for GSP in 2015. 8, consider a corporate code of conduct. Even advocates of MNCs as vehicles for development in the 70s believed that these companies needed a mandatory code of conduct in order to be good corporate citizens. The OECD developed guidelines in the 70s, but they're not mandatory. Name brand companies have become linked to forced labor in Xinjiang. Evidence shows that companies claiming commitments to stakeholder capitalism have worse records on sustainability than those who don't. Moving toward true stakeholder capitalism may require mandatory compliance with guidelines as a condition of importation under these programs. Finally, consider how we can include developing countries in our plans to diversify supply chains. Developing countries don't necessarily have the budgets nor the tools to stockpile essential goods or to produce them. As we evaluate these programs and consider onshoring and supply chain diversification, it may be possible to include developing countries in our plans. Thank you so much for the opportunity to testify today.
Thank you very much, Ms. Paulson. Mr. Cook, we welcome your comments.
Mr. Chairman, Blumenauer, Ranking Member Buchanan, and members of the Subcommittee on Trade, I want to thank you for holding this very important hearing on the Caribbean Basin Trade Partnership Act consideration for renewal. And I want to thank particularly Representative Sewell, Representative Weinstrup for their leadership on H.R. 991. Founded in 1901, Hanes Brands is one of the largest marketing of basic apparel, founded and headquartered in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. Our products are found in 90% of U.S. households. Unlike most apparel companies, Hanes primarily operates its own manufacturing facilities, and we take great pride in our reputation for ethical business practices and are the only apparel producer to ever be honored by the Great Place to Work Institute for our workplace practices in Central America and the Caribbean. Today, I urge you for your quick and timely extension of the Cbtpa. The Cbtpa is a non-controversial piece of legislation, and during these exceptional times, business and nations are challenged. U.S. exporters and investors in the region urgently need the program extended prior to expiration. I do want to note that when Cbtpa was first introduced, it was then, as today, very bipartisan. I scanned the original 75 co-sponsors and I saw the names of some of you, including you, Mr. Chairman Blumenauer, Representative Richard Neal, along with Representative Kevin Brady, a virtual who's who of great leaders that have worked earnestly and jointly to bring economic opportunity, growth of U.S. exports, and critical hemispheric integration. I want to highlight 6 areas that demonstrate the great achievements thus far by Cbtpa. First, the benefits to U.S. cotton, yarn, and U.S. textile industry. Cbtpa was one of the first hemispheric trade programs, and the requirement for using U.S. yarns and fabrics supports our cotton industry and has kept manufacturers like HBI and other brands invested in the region. HBI today alone exports over 6 million pounds of U.S. cotton yarn each month, or 72 million pounds of U.S. yarn a year. Second, benefits to U.S. ports and trade. The program is designed for two-way trade. Key U.S. ports have benefited tremendously. Ports have invested heavily by adding cranes and modern advanced systems for better and safer transport. And this two-way traffic secures jobs for the shippers and longshoremen. Third, U.S. security is enhanced through customs enforcement. The Cbtpa included measures requiring greater customs cooperation, and this cooperation expanded to help address the challenges of illegal drugs and human trafficking. Operations are built and fully comply to both U.S. and European standards. Fifth, the export of U.S. business practices has led to bargaining, collective bargaining, and freedom of assembly for workers in the region. Our textile operation in the Cbtpa production has had successful collective bargaining agreements renewed multiple times. Sixth, the Cbtpa has had a tremendous impact on the host countries. HBI not only invests in its brick and mortars and manufacturing, but in the community to be part of the social structure. We have invested in renewable energy projects. We've brought U.S. doctors and nurses for medical assistance, and we have funded the upgrade and completion of surgical and hospital rooms. In addition, we've provided high school classes to employees that have graduated over 1,800 employees from high school. In conclusion, Mr. Chairman, we highly encourage the passage of Cbtpa, and the sooner the better. Companies like HBI have followed the U.S. congressional intent to nearshore and use more U.S. input that will be at a significant disadvantage if it expires. I thank you again, Mr. Chairman, and for the members of the subcommittee for your consideration.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cook. Without objection, each member will be recognized for 5 minutes to question our witnesses. We will not observe the Gibbons rule in this remote setting, but will instead go in order of seniority, switching between majority and minority members. Members are reminded to unmute yourselves when you are recognized for 5 minutes. I will begin by recognizing myself, but I want to expedite the process here a little bit in recognition to the extra effort that Ms. Sewell has done in this area. So I'm simply going to ask one question and then turn to Ms. Sewell for the remainder of my time. At the end of the hearing, I want to go back and visit with Ms. Stewart and also Mr. Sanin to go into the details that you talked about, that situation where the horrific health consequences that were where the company simply did not follow through in what they were required to do. But I will do that at the end of the hearing. Let me just ask one question right now. Ms. Baltzan, you mentioned that we don't have environmental criteria. Would you like to elaborate on that a little bit, what it would look like as we move forward to be able to take consideration of the environment?
I think it's really important for the same reason having the labor provisions in there was important, which is we don't want to be encouraging the exportation of labor violations, inequality, and environmental degradation and harming the health of people in developing countries. I think the goal should be to to create more of a race to the top than a race to the bottom. For an environment criterion, Mr. Doggett introduced it in 2015. Most of the subcommittee members, I believe, were co-sponsored it. It was to require developing countries to enforce their own laws on environment and also to abide by their international commitments on environment. So these were choices that developing countries made about their environmental obligations, and I think that's a really good place to start.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Ms. Sewell, can I yield the balance of my time to you for your observation and questioning?
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, and to Ranking Member Buchanan for holding this important hearing and for yielding your time. Let me say now how excited I am to be the lead sponsor of H.R. 991. I believe it is an imperative that we reauthorize the Caribbean Basin Trade Partnership Agreement, Cbtpa, and I am thrilled that the legislation enjoys bipartisan and bicameral support. I also want to thank Dr. Winstrup for being the Republican lead on this legislation with me in the House. I know that much of our trade policy can be controversial, but I believe that the reauthorization of Cbtpa is something that we all can support. By allowing for the duty and quota-free trade of products made with U.S. goods, we are promoting economic development in the Caribbean Basin region while also strengthening our Western Hemisphere supply chain. In 2018, the United States exported to CBI countries. The exports included or totaled $13.4 billion, while the imports from CBI countries totaled $6 billion, creating a $7.4 billion trade surplus for the United States. For Haiti, the economic benefit of the Cbtpa are essential, with over 90% of their nearly $1 billion in exports entering the United States with the Cbtpa or HOPE duty-free treatment. Moreover, the Association of Haitian Industries has estimated that the Cbtpa, along with the HOPE and HELP program, has created over 50,000 jobs in Haiti alone. I was also glad to see that the USTR's biannual CBI report found that all 8 beneficiary countries were in compliance with the Cbtpa eligibility requirements, which include standards in labor rights, children labor, and anti-corruption. I also want to acknowledge the great work of the Solidarity Center that Ms. Stewart represents and their report about labor conditions on the ground. More needs to be done, no doubt, to improve conditions in the Caribbean Basin. And I believe that is why reauthorizing Cptpa is so important. We need more enforcement and more engagement with our neighbors and allowing Cbtpa to expire with only reduced transparency and cooperation. Before I move to my questions, I want to thank all of the members of this subcommittee on both sides of the aisle for their co-sponsorship of H.R. 991. And I also want to note that while other preference programs like GSP are set to expire at the end of the year, trying to move Cbtpa reauthorization with GSP would likely threaten the expiration of the Cbtpa unless we can do both together. With only 20 days left until the Cbtpa expires, I hope that we will avoid any unnecessary delays and support a clean reauthorization of Cbtpa when it comes up at the end of this month. I will end at this point. Thank you so much for yielding to me, Mr. Chairman, and I will wait my turn to ask my questions. Thanks again.
You bet. Congressman Buchanan. You're still muted, Vern. You need to unmute.
How's that?
We don't want to miss any of your wisdom.
Did you get that? Am I all right now? Can you hear me?
Can.
Okay. Again, I just want to thank you, Mr. Chairman, again for this important hearing, and Congresswoman Stool for your incredible leadership and you know that myself and I think both sides of the aisle want to get this done quickly. I just want to say, as past chairman of the Florida Chamber, we've always felt like Florida was the gateway to the Caribbean. I know they do a lot all over the country, North Carolina, a lot of other states, but it's been a very important partnership for everybody. I'd like to ask the ambassador, Denny, his thoughts on, I know he touched on the importance of getting this done now, Cbtpa, but I'd like to give him a minute or two to further discuss the top 2 or 3 points why it's so important to get it done, ideally on a bipartisan basis by the end of the month. Ambassador?
Supported by. Hello, thank you, Congressman. Do you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, so as I told you, there's a lot of reasons that I think that bill is important both for Haiti and for United States. First of all, you know, creating stability in the country is a key issue. Otherwise, those people will go another place. So I think this is very important that we create that stability by creating more jobs. Haiti, through the Cbtpa, has the opportunity to create millions of jobs if we create the infrastructure legally and socially to accept all the advantage of the Cbtpa. And less job in Haiti, this is more job in Haiti, this is less trouble in the neighboring country, in the Caribbean Sea, less boat people, and let's so on. And the second reason is we are in America. I think the nearshoring concept, it is something that I like a lot because America, the world leader in the world, we have the chance to be near the shore of the United States. I think this is good that it's profitable for the neighboring country. Like Haiti is one of them, and the Caribbean Basin is a place where we have a lot of traffic and we need to create more jobs for our neighboring people. At the same time, this is a win-win system where also the U.S. participate and profit of that issue, because we have said that the cotton industry, the yarn industry, apparel, all profit of that. And I think on the reason also, we are so close to the United States. It's so profitable for both sides to produce, and it will be faster for those companies to have the product.
Mr. Ambassador, thank you. I've got limited time. I did want to ask Mr. Cook a question. Mr. Cook, I wanted to get your thoughts on the China factor. They're becoming a bigger player in the region. They're active in Africa and a lot of other places around the world. What's your thoughts on, if we don't get this done, does that give China additional benefit to take on up some of our businesses? Mr. Cook.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Ranking Member Buchanan. Absolutely. And I think the sad part would be is there's been so much work done in a bipartisan way by Congress to build an integrated relationship with the region, and to lose that energy and to have that stall, that vacuum would be occupied by either China direct sourcing, or it would be filled by, you know, China alternatives coming into the region, and that would be very unfortunate.
With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you very much. We will turn now to Congressman Pasgrell.
Mr. Chairman, thanks for putting us together today.
It's great to have you back, Bill.
Thank you, and it's good to be back. I'm waiting to roll up my sleeves next week, but little by little, day by day. I won't be too anxious, I hope. I wanted to commend the sponsor, Representative Terry Sewell. It's a bipartisan piece of legislation that she's put forth. I'm a proud co-sponsor of the U.S. Caribbean Basin Trade Partnership Act. We need reauthorization. The sooner the better. It helps facilitate economic development while holding our trading partners accountable for their labor practices. But too often the values in our trade agreements and preference programs stagnate with time. So we need a critical eye to ensure past problems do not remain in place. President Trump has failed to uphold his promise to eliminate the trade deficit, and trade-related job losses reached record highs. We have an opportunity to vet our preference programs. We cannot let successful programs lapse or become idle. The Solidarity Center notes our Caribbean Basin trade programs have helped generate formal employment for more than 57,000 Haitian workers, which is critical since a staggering 88% of the economically active population works informally and is excluded from the protection of the Haitian labor law. We need to address that. I'm a proud co-sponsor, as I said, of this legislation, and I'm going to do whatever I can to get it passed. I know some Caribbean countries are not perfect. Often economic gains go to corporations, not even living wages, safe workplaces, or proper labor benefits. But letting this program lapse will only make matters worse. The corporations have a responsibility here. And the corporations must understand that they have obligations in the trade deals that we talk about. So we always reference the country that the deal refers to. We need to reference more the corporations that are just as much a part of the deal. They can make this work, and they can make this a much more difficult agreement. We need to look more into that. It puts more pressure on the corporations, but I think it will make for a better balance of trade and make for better efforts at labor practices. We need to be active in evaluating whether our trade programs reflect our values to grow labor and environmental protections, as the chairman has pointed out many times, that help develop a robust middle class. These programs should help workers reap the rewards of their own labor. As Ms. Balson's testimony reminded us, our good friend John Lewis commented in 2015, "What does it profit a great nation to gain trade and lose its soul?" We should honor John's call to think critically about our trade programs by ensuring that our economic policies at home and abroad bend toward justice. And I have two questions, one for Ms. Balson and one for Ms. Stewart. Ms. Balson, as you know, our trade policies have not always made improvements for workers in our environment. For instance, despite going into entry on July the 1st, the new NAFTA has not meaningfully changed respect for labor rights in Mexico. I've read most of the data in this year, enclosure and as well as entree. How can we use our preference programs to help corporations, or to hold corporations accountable to respecting labor and the environment? Ms. Balson?
Thank you, Mr. Pasgrell. I think the one idea that I suggested in my testimony is whether or not we condition the ability to import on multinational corporate compliance with, for example, the OECD guidelines. I think what we've seen as corporations talk about the importance of stakeholder capitalism but have trouble living up to it, we need to change the incentive structure for them and not just rely on good works. I realize your time is short. I'll let you switch to Ms. Stewart.
Ms. Stewart, I want to ask you this question. Your testimony of workers dying after being wrongly denied medical care is heartbreaking. There only being one authentic collective bargaining agreement in the entire Haitian garment sector, I believe, is atrocious. Can you please expand on the efforts to improve Haitian garment unions, Ms. Stewart? And would it be helpful to penalize non-compliant factories?
Thank you for the question. So absolutely, the one collective bargaining agreement is at the Codevi industrial plant, which I believe is where the factory that Haynes sources from. And that collective bargaining agreement expires, but under the Haitian labor law, it renews automatically. Other than that, that is the only agreement that we know of. And part of the reason for that is because of the history of repression of freedom of association and the fear that workers have in organizing because of the retaliation in terms of firing and other punishments that they receive, that we hear that they receive when they come together to exercise their right under the law. The Solidarity Center has long been working with trade unions to build their capacity to engage workers and organize. But again, the enabling environment is very difficult given the repression of freedom of association that exists.
Yeah, I've drawn a similarity between the problems we had in Mexico and the committees negotiating this deal. In Mexico, of course, the governments have control of almost 98% of all the unions, the collective bargaining agents in Mexico. In Haitian, the problem is they have, we have an authentic collective bargaining unit, but the Haitian garment sector doesn't have, we have only one representative for the entire garment industry.
Bill, I really appreciate the line of inquiry here, but we've got lots of people, and I hope that I'm not being arbitrary, but if we can not go too far past 5, we want to make sure everybody, we have some people that are going to have to leave.
Sorry,
no problem. And again, no. It's great to hear your voice. Congressman Conn.
That isn't what my wife said. Thank you, Chairman.
All right, can you hear me?
Hey, George.
All right, Bill, it's great to see you.
Thank you.
I look forward to better times when you and I can share some proper fellowship.
Very good.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Buchanan, thank you for holding the hearing. I didn't get the memo about it being National Thursday, so pardon my attire. The Caribbean Basin Trade Partnership Act and the Generalized System of Preferences are the foundation of strong geopolitical ties in the region. Plus, they enhance U.S. competitiveness by diversifying trade and strengthening the economies of developing countries in our region. So in 2019, the GSP reduced import costs by $24 million in North Carolina alone. And this year so far, the GSP has saved North Carolinians $8.5 million. So accordingly, certainly we need to renew the Caribbean Basin Trade Partnership Act, but we also need to renew the GSP. And as Mr. Buchanan said, with the timing of the Congress and the upcoming election, the time is now to renew them both. They're both very important. So my question is, Mr. Cook, a fine and distinguished North Carolinian that I'm glad to see. Mr. Cook, could you talk about the importance of GSP partnerships as we work to recover from the coronavirus and as we try and struggle to revive small businesses around the Mr. Cook?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Congressman Holding. Good to see you again. GSP, like Cbtpa, builds integrated partnerships based on ethics and values that the U.S. is trying to promote, not only within the United States. And one of the great gifts that the United States has is the ability to export our ethics and our high standards. And the renewal of GSP, like the renewal of Cbtpa, would certainly go a long way to continue that and to continue the importance of its development influence.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chairman, I'll yield back.
Thank you very much. From this point, trying to balance this out a little bit, we will be recognizing two Democrats and then one from the minority. So we're going to have first Congressman Kind, who will be followed by Mr. Davis.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank you and also Representative Buchanan for holding this hearing. Obviously, the clock is ticking. I want to commend our colleagues, Representative Sewell and Wenstrup, for your bipartisan initiative and lead on this. It is important to get this done. And as important as it is for all the countries involved with the Caribbean Basin Trade Act, it's particularly important to Haiti and Haiti's development. So, Ambassador Denis, if you could just take a moment to kind of fill us in a little bit more about what this means to Haiti's development and what expiration of this initiative would do to set back the efforts there, because obviously there are great challenges in the country, in the region. We can't afford any failed states in our backyard. We don't want that. This trade initiative is important to help with Haiti's development. So, Ambassador, if you could enlighten us a little further about the importance.
Thank you, Congressman, for the question. The Cbtpa for us is one of the pillars of the industry because by this capacity to create a lot of jobs in the country. And job, easy job, because this is job where you do assembly and garment. And then with that, you can have what we call vertical integration, where the people can learn more to that and then they develop themselves. So by creating those jobs, that will reduce the instability that occur in the country. You know, we are since '86, we are passing having a trouble to have a steady government steady because we have problem with the constitution and so and so. We believe, and I'm among those who strongly believe, because I'm also before a businessman, I was president of the Chamber of Commerce, that the job creation is one of the key issues to bring stability in this country. So the Cbtpa, amongst other activities, will be very crucial for job creation in Haiti. And we are so close to the United States, one of the biggest, but so we can be very successful with that. So.
Well, thank you, Mr. Ambassador. Mr. Chairman, it's great to see the bipartisan support and the urgency to get this done. Let me just conclude by offering my hearty welcome back to Bill Pasgrell. Really great to see Bill, and I look forward to seeing you in person next week, Billy. I yield back, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Ron.
Thank you. And we don't care what your wife says, Bill. We like to hear your voice. Now it's Congressman Davis.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and let me thank you for holding the hearing. I also want to thank all of the witnesses for being with us today, and I commend my colleagues, Terry Sewell and Dr. Wenstrup, for the leadership that they provided as we move towards reauthorization and renewal of these trade agreements with the Caribbean Basin. I've always been a big fan of Haiti since I was a small child, reading about its history and thinking of how much leadership people like Toussaint Louverture, Prince Henry, and Dessalines, and that whole group provided. I've also watched as Haiti has struggled ever since we've known about it to maintain a level of development and activity that would move it beyond what its status has been in the world order. Ambassador, let me commend you and thank you for your work. And I'm definitely in agreement that the trade agreements need to be in place. beyond, let's say, the trade agreements that we might be dealing with, could you share any other ways that you think the United States of America could be helpful? Or how can we be most helpful? You mentioned our power, our influence, our status in the world order. How can we be most helpful to the country of Haiti?
Thank you, Congressman, for the question. This is a very important one, and I think United States can play a big role in Haiti. So far, Dominican Republic and United States are a bigger ally. So we look for United States. How strong are the institutions in United States? It's a model for us. We are in the process of building our institutions. Institutions are weak, and we need the support of United States in helping us to better, to make us stronger. And that's been, the institution of security are essential for a country to control the internal and external threats. What we face right now in Haiti, we have a lot of gangs because our police is small, weak. We have good men running the police, but unfortunately, with a country with a ratio very so little police, maybe barely 15,000 for a population of 12 million. I think, we cannot sustain, a control face to gang proliferation and so on. So we need to have security force. The Constitution recognized two security force, a new army and the police. I have the chance, I was Minister of Defense, and I introduced, the new concept for a modern army that with the Inter-American Development, Inter-American Defense Board. So this is a way where we have an army dedicated for the natural protection and so and so. So this is the reinforcement of institution, the first thing that I think United States can do to help us building a better society suitable for the challenge that we face in the 21st century.
Very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Davis. Congressman Rice, you're on deck. We need you to unmute, Tom. You're not coming through, Tom. Can you unmute?
Oh, I got it. Okay, I think I found it. All right, I'm there. Sorry about the technological savagery there. Yeah, I am in favor of this agreement and extending it, and I appreciate the work of Dr. Winstrup and Mrs. Sewell in bringing forth the bill to extend this. But I want everybody to kind of understand the cost of it. We're talking about the benefits throughout, and I think it's important that we shine a light on what the cost of these things are as well. And I'd like the help of Mrs. Baltson in doing that. Mrs. Baltson, what this agreement does is it eliminates tariffs on goods from these favored countries, correct?
Yes, Mr. Rice.
And are those trade preferences reciprocal? Do the countries also eliminate tariffs on goods coming out of the United States and into those countries?
They do not.
And generally, how much are those tariffs?
I think it depends.
Just give me a rough.
The average tariffs on I think the average tariff on textiles may be around 7%. I'm not sure.
And you have mentioned as a potential problem for these agreements, the rules of origin issue. Can you just generally, in layman's terms, explain what you mean by that?
The rules of origin.
I'm sorry, just very limited time because I only have a very limited time.
Sorry, yeah, okay. We are trying to decide, the rules of origin decide how much production has to happen in that country in order for it to be eligible for the tariff preference.
So in other words, we don't want the Chinese halfway making a shirt and sending it to Haiti to be finished and then send it on the United States to get the favored tariff protections under this agreement, right?
Yes.
And have we seen problems with rules of origin under this Caribbean partnership agreement?
I think the way the textile rules are designed are actually different than the industrial rules. And I think the textile rules are very carefully designed in order to promote regional supply chains and not to allow too much content from China.
And what about industrial? Are we seeing problems with industrial?
I think we see a lot of pressure on these countries from China to allow more Chinese content in these goods to qualify. And we've pushed back on that for many years.
Okay, Mr. Cook, I appreciate your testimony about the good that you're doing for people in Haiti. Why are you in Haiti? Why? It's an American company. Why are you producing textiles in Haiti?
We're producing because it's nearby. It's the use of U.S. yarn, U.S. cotton that are converted into fabric in the Dominican Republic. So it gives us a very good economic opportunity to make apparel, use a lot of U.S. content, and have a sustainable supply chain.
Where do you sell the stuff you make in Haiti? Are you selling in the United States?
We sell it in the United States and also into Canada, and some goes to Europe.
But my point is, and I'm not trying to be obstinate, I understand that we're trying to help lift these developing countries, and that's a very laudable goal. But just to be totally clear, I mean, if you're using U.S. content and you're selling and you're shipping it to Haiti, and then you're making it and selling it in the United States, why wouldn't you just make it in the United States?
Because we have to be competitive, and we need to have a supply chain that we can use. Trade agreements between the DR, Haiti, and the United States gives us the opportunity to leverage not just the U.S. market, but the Canadian market, the European market, and that gives us a competition against China.
Because you can get lower wages there, correct?
No, it's just we can get an overall lower cost manufacturing of high standards with sustainable product, because in our case, we use so much U.S. cotton, about 75 million pounds a year runs through that network going into DR and Haiti.
And I'm sure a lot of that cotton is produced right here in my district. And again, I favor this extension, and the purpose of it is to help lift developing countries that need our help. But I just want people, I'm just being clear about, what the cost of it are as well. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Rice. Now, Mr. Kildee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can you hear me okay? Can you hear me?
We can. You bet.
Well, I want to thank you.
Loud and clear.
Thank you. I want to thank you and obviously thank Congresswoman Sewell for her leadership, their work and your work on this issue. And obviously, in many ways, this is a continuation of much of the work of our late colleague John Lewis, whom we all miss desperately. Your work on this partnership and your commitment to using U.S. trade policy to bring people out of poverty, I think, are really important goals. And I think that is where our values and our economic interests do align. I think we can be a force for good in so many ways in this world, and one of the ways is to ensure economic opportunity for people, certainly within the region that we have a great interest in. I mentioned this a lot on this committee, that I come from Flint, Michigan. And I like to give little brief history lessons. On December 30, 1936, a group of workers came together against one of the largest companies in the world to fight for the right to collectively bargain. The ability to collectively bargain for wages and working conditions is closely tied to quality of life and is really the pathway, I think, to economic opportunity in many places and in many ways. Workers can take care of their families when they are able to get a fair and decent wage and working conditions that are safe. So this moment in my own hometown of Flint was an important turning point in American labor history, but not every country has had that progress. And so even though this may seem somewhat redundant because this has been addressed, I think it's really important to focus on this point. The ability to collectively bargain and to create unions, I believe, is a fundamental right. And when we look at our trade policy, we have to ensure that we use our soft power to require countries to allow for collective bargaining and the creation of unions to lift people out of poverty. So I wonder if Ms. Stewart and Ms. Baltzan can each mention or talk a bit about how this act has impacted people in the Caribbean and their ability to collectively bargain and impact living conditions in poverty. And this aligns somewhat with the questions that Mr. Rice was coming at, perhaps from a different perspective, but I think it's an important point, and I would love to get more of your thinking on this.
Thank you for the question, Congressman Kildee, and absolutely. In 2000, well, actually, let me say, the expanded benefits under the Cbtpa that have carried through to the HOPE Act of 2008 have created the Better Work program that I mentioned earlier, and that provides independent monitoring and regular reporting on the labor rights situation in Haiti. And that is very important to be able to raise the profile of the labor rights challenges. Since that program began reporting in 2009, the first independent union gained its presence in Port-au-Prince in the industrial park there. Prior to that, there was no independent union. Now there are many, but there are none of them have collective bargaining agreements. One of them is working towards that. In order to achieve that, they need to represent at least 2/3 of the workers in the factory in order to compel bargaining. And so to have a trade agreement in place that requires Haiti to enforce its laws on the right to organize and bargain is critical to ensuring that there's an international pressure as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kildee. I think we have, on a bipartisan basis, concluded for many years now that trade based on a race to the bottom is not an acceptable model. And we've had that in our preference programs for many years, and now we have it in our trade agreements. And I think our efforts to address these issues are always a work in progress, including the most recent NAFTA, where we have factory inspections in Mexico, or at least the opportunity of doing that. So I think what Ms. Stewart is describing is this constant effort to always try to do better to make sure that workers are being adequately protected and that kind of arbitrage isn't a basis for trade.
Thank you all. I thank the witnesses for your testimony. Mr. Chairman, thank you for the hearing. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Kildee. Mr. Panetta.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate that and want to thank all the witnesses for your time today, as well as your preparation and, of course, your service. Thank you very much. I just go ahead and get right into it. Starting with Mr. Ambassador, obviously we appreciate the opportunity to ask you questions and for your participation in this hearing. Now, earlier you said that without these types of preferences provided by the Cbtpa, the garment industry in Haiti wouldn't exist. Let me ask you something. How much do you think the industry would shrink if Cbtpa were not to be reauthorized? And if it was going to shrink, where would that manufacturing go, in your opinion?
Thank you, Congressman, for the question. The evidence, the advantage are obvious. Last year, we export 1 billion from the United States, even we have social disturbances. So that means you can figure if the day we create, let's say, 500,000, how many money we can bring to this country, to our country. So I think this is a crucial piece of legislation, not only for Haiti, but for all the Caribbean. And that makes the Caribbean also a safe place, a safer place, Well, don't forget we are the closest neighbors of United States. And in the Caribbean Sea, there is a lot of things happening. So we need to create stability, not only in Haiti, in all the entire region. So I think that is, without the Cbtpa, that could create a lot of disturbance, not only in Haiti, elsewhere in the region.
And where do you think the manufacturing would go, sir?
Oh, well, they will go in Asia. So they will go in Asia. So obviously, where there is maybe more aggressive situation, where there is more knowledge, and maybe they will make China maybe become against or something like that. So
Understood. Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. Moving on to Mr. Sassin. I know you talked about certainty, which is extremely important to the investors and obviously users of this program, and that you've lost orders and investment over the past year, that Cbtpa has not been reauthorized. Can you just give us, again, a sense of how many orders you have lost or a percentage of lost revenue the industry has experienced because of this?
Thank you, Mr. Panetta. I can tell you, first of all, that Cbtpa, the weight of Cbtpa in our industry is 30% of the workforce out of the 55,000. And from the start of the COVID pandemic, we have lost over 35% in orders.
Thank you. Now, also, obviously, this has come up. We have the Hope and the Help programs, which provides, Haiti with duty-free access to U.S. markets for apparel, and those don't expire until 2025. Why is renewing? If you have that, why is renewing Cbtpa so important? Since you already have duty-free access under the Hope and the Help programs.
No, first of all, because Cbtpa uses U.S. origin raw material like yarns. So therefore, we have to continue. For instance, people like Mr. Jerry Cook, who has been in Haiti over 15 years, supporting over 10,000 families. That would create a problem for him. And we cannot afford to lose somebody like Haynes. Also, the Hope program has a quota, whereas Cbtpa does not. And thirdly, if we put Cbtpa under Hope, then it will use Hope's quota. Therefore, curtailing our ability to receive other foreign investors, mostly from Asia. Right now, the majority of manufacturers in Haiti are from Korea. And now we're getting from Sri Lanka and from Taiwan. So I will stop there. May I remind one short thing? When we were asking for the special programs and we were given Hope, we, ADI, were the ones who insist on having the capacity to monitor the factories individually. And that's how the Better Work program through the ILO was created. Also, the Office of the Labor Ombudsman was created by the Hope legislation, and it's in existence today, and that person has cabinet ranking. All because we asked for that.
Thank you again. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Panetta. Now we have Mr. Schweikert.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Look, I've only been to the DR in Haiti once, and a single visit is sort of difficult to get your head around. But I did have just a couple one-off questions. Mr. Clerk, there's a term called transshipment. We were having this as one of the issues we dealt with as we were replacing NAFTA. Do we see any of that in the DR or Haiti, products coming in, being slightly altered or relabeled? Are we safe there?
Yeah, thank you. It's a great question. One of the great things about Cbtpa is it built high customs enforcement in cooperation. And when you go through the U.S. Customs Service and look at their reports, their audits, it is a program that is run very clean, very well documented, and very well managed. So you're not seeing any of the transshipments and concerns that you may see from other countries. What's made in Haiti is made in Haiti. What's made in the DR is made in the DR.
Okay, that is helpful. Can I ask a little more broader question? Outside just the garment industry, what are the other fragilities, if I'm going to use that word, that make helping the region expand economically? Is it access to fuel? Is it access to capital? Is it access to court systems that work? If you know, I'm sitting here in Phoenix, Arizona, and I really had a passion to want to help folks in the Caribbean and wanted to open up a business, what would I find is my barrier to making that business and to work? What else is the problem?
I'd say the number one is access to energy. We had a problem of getting good energy, so we built our own it's the largest bioenergy plant in the Caribbean. It burns coconut shells. 100% of our steam energy comes from renewable energy. We have solar operations that we're setting up, but getting energy into especially Haiti, water, and the other is infrastructure, just good roads, and then education, and just that type of fundamental development is missing and would be very important. And as a producer and investor, you need those things surrounding your operations.
Thank you, Ambassador. And I know this is a little beyond what a trade subcommittee, but in the past I've had a fascination in regards to things like the Asian Development Bank and some of these other types of programs that were designed to actually help build the ability to have the fuel depot or the infrastructure. Is that the ultimate approach to help the region sort of build a level of escape velocity so it can be much more sustainable? I mean, what else can we do that helps? Because, you know, when you travel through Haiti, you know, there's some wonderful things. There's also things that break your heart.
Thank you very much for the question. You know, that is part of my job also here, to attract more investment in Haiti. And there is what you see as problem for us now is more opportunity, business opportunity for Haitian and US company. For example, you talk about my predecessor talked about the energy issue. Right now, we have a project of 150 million loan from Taiwan. It is very low interest. That is in course, and that's going to be able to create more energy. You know, creating more port, creating more a legal framework for to help company being in Haiti. Right now, I have a vast program to work with DFC to see how we can build some major infrastructure issue like transshipment port, all those issues. I think Haiti is a country to build. So this is a lot of opportunity, and mostly those opportunity, that is my role here, has to go to US company. Most is possible. So where we see problem, I see benefit, I see investment, I see potential. So I think this is those things we have to do to improve the quality. Parallelly, we have to improve the social condition of the people, you know, by social housing and so on.
Understood. Thank you, Ambassador, and thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your patience.
We appreciate your questions. Now we have Congresswoman Murphy.
Thank you to all of our witnesses for joining us today. I think this hearing has been a great opportunity to show that even during a pandemic, Congress is working on issues that benefit not only our regional neighbors, but also American workers and American businesses. The Cbtpa expires this month, so it's really nice to see our committee in a bipartisan manner actually go through regular order and hold a hearing to discuss the program. You know, I represent a district in Florida, and Florida is the closest state to the Caribbean and often shares the joys and the challenges of hurricane season with these countries. Florida is also home to over 600,000 people born in Cbtpa countries, including approximately 325,000 from Haiti alone. So I know that reauthorization is not only good for our country, but important to my constituents here in Florida. You know, more generally, I believe trade on balance is good for our economy, our workers, and our national security. But I'm not one that says I support free trade, because that suggests some sort of free-for-all. I want a trading system where we reduce tariff and non-tariff barriers to trade, but where there are clear and fair rules and consequences for countries that violate those rules. And I support reauthorizing Cbtpa because Cbtpa is a great example of a system that works, where countries receive preferential treatment if they adhere to certain standards that reflect American values and benefit American consumers. During the most recent regular review of eligibility, USTR determined that all Cbtpa beneficiary countries continue to meet the criteria. I think that's great news. But we also know trade is more than just buying and selling goods. It's a really important tool for our foreign policy, and it goes hand in hand with international development, which we've heard a bit about in this hearing. And the Caribbean Basin countries are regional neighbors that have common resources and a shared history. They're also important strategic allies. And in an environment where reliable global partnerships are so rare and especially valued, Cbtpa is one way for us to invest in the region's economic development and security. And finally, in light of a wave of what I would call protectionist rhetoric, some of which we heard today, related and unrelated to COVID, it's refreshing to be focused on ways to continue expanding and promoting trade in our hemisphere. So I'll start with Ambassador Denis. Can you elaborate on your comments regarding the importance of a timely renewal of Cbtpa for economic and political stability within Haiti? And how has COVID impacted business confidence in producing there?
Thank you, Congresswoman Murphy. Thanks for your question. We know you have a lot of Haitian and in your constituency, and we appreciate also all you are doing for them. And but you know, we benefit a lot from also not only from the Cbtpa but also from the remittance coming from your constituency to the families in Haiti. So I think those kind of relationships are importantly for us. According to ADI, the industry which provide direct employment to almost 60,000 workers yearly has becoming to feel, you know, the problem with the COVID-19 and with the non-renewal of the Cbtpa. So we're very, very concerned about that. Plus the COVID-19 this is worldwide. People lose jobs, and our industry try to convert quickly to produce PPE, and then this is an opportunity, the nearshoring, producing for U.S. industry, the PPE, but the non-renewal is one of the biggest threats for us because, as I said before, the people are very fear to renew the contract because they are waiting to see if the Congress will pass the bill. So this is critical for us to have that bill passed the earliest possible. They are going to say, yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. And Mr. Sassine, can you take that down to a practical level and estimate how your company might respond if Cptpa is not renewed or is allowed to lapse for a period of time?
Like Ambassador Denis just said, right now, the commitment to go forward from some buyers is kind of timid because they don't know what's going to be happening to Cbtpa. So this is a big fear for us in that sense, that Cbtpa not renewed, and therefore these companies are going to be looking somewhere else. For instance, the CAFTA DR countries, and because they are using qualified US raw material. So again, I remind you that 30% of that industry is on Cbtpa.
Yes. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you very much. I don't, let's see, Congresswoman Sewell, wow, thanks for your patience. Thanks for your hard work on this, and you are recognized.
Again, I want to thank you, Mr. Chairman, for hosting and having this hearing. I want to welcome back and join my colleagues in welcoming back our dear colleague, Bill Pasgrell. Great to see you, Bill. Look forward to seeing you in person as we get back together next week. I also want to thank our witnesses. I have had the great pleasure of working with Ambassador Denis and George Sachin, and I just want to thank you all for your patience. I think that we gathered 2 years ago or 3 years ago to talk about reauthorization of the Cbtpa, and we're finally here. I also wanted to acknowledge that John Lewis was one of the original co-sponsors of this bill, and I want to thank all of my colleagues who have signed on to H.R. 991. It really does enjoy bipartisan and bicameral support, and again, want to thank Dr. Winstrup for being the Republican lead on this bill in the House. I also wanted to acknowledge that I inherited this bill the last time it was reauthorized. It was reauthorized under the lead sponsorship of Charlie Rangel, the first African-American chair of Ways and Means. It's a great honor for me to carry this bill because of the important relationship between Caribbean Basin countries and our country, and the need to foster that relationship. Indeed, it was John Lewis who said that our trade policies are a reflection of our values. What does it profit a great nation to gain trade and lose its soul? I think it's really important marker for us to reauthorize the Cbtpa before it actually expires, September 30th, and I look forward to working with all of my colleagues to see it across the finish line. My question is to you, George. As you know, Cptpa is a part of a larger system of preference programs that promote economic growth and development in Haiti. I was hoping that you would expand on how Cbtpa fits into the larger framework of CBERA, the HELP and the HOPE programs. Would there be a cascading effect in Haiti if Cbtpa was allowed to expire? And again, thank you for all of your leadership, sir, in helping get this bill to where it is today.
Thank you for your leadership, Ms. Sewell. Well, the first thing I will say, I will remind you that when we started back in 2005, we were only at 9,000 workers, working mostly for Mr. Cook here, making T-shirts. And thanks to the Cbtpa back then, that created the cascade, if you want, if I may use your term, of having the HOPE legislation from Chairman Rangel. And the HOPE legislation came with that baggage of having the capacity of monitoring the well-being and the good functioning of labor relations through the Better Work Program and also the labor ombudsperson. And that, now this is my personal conviction. Today we 2 years ago we reached 58,000 people. We were reaching 60, and unfortunately problems happened. Now we are down at around 55,000. But my deepest conviction is, if I have 250,000 Haitians getting paid a steady salary, even though that salary might not be in your conception living wages, but it's wages that they would not have had otherwise, I will change. The politics of the countries will change. if we have 250, 300,000 workers getting paid every week and being monitored by organizations like the Solidarity Center. By the way, we also 4 years ago asked that Solidarity Center come to Haiti, and they did receive assistance from the Congress through Mrs. Susan Washington, and spent a year in Haiti to reinforce the
George, I have another question. Due to timing, I'm sorry to cut you off, but I wanted to ask Beth, I with your testimony, Beth, on preference trade programs, needing to focus on trying to get folks into the middle class and middle class beneficiaries. And so I was wondering what we can do in Congress to do more of that in trying to promote wage equality for women who are disproportionately holding a lot of these jobs in the Caribbean Basin. How can we promote a better wage equality? If you could speak to that, thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Sewell. I think obviously it's very important to get Cbtpa renewed before the end of the month. I think there's an opportunity longer term to have a revisitation of all of the criteria for these programs. And of course, GSP criteria are applicable to all of the countries. I think that's a really important place to start because we see these issues across all of the regions and across all developing countries. So I'm hoping that this hearing gets it done on Cbtpa, but that it's also an impetus for us to have a revisitation of the conception for these agreements, which goes all the way back to 1974.
Thank you again, Mr. Chairman, for indulging me to ask that question regarding wage equality. And again, thank you all for your support of the bill.
Super. Thank you very much. Mr. Beyer.
Thank you. If I can find the unmute button there. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, very much. And I'm a proud co-sponsor of this legislation, but I am worried. Beth Bolton, I very much appreciated your testimony. The entire written piece was fascinating. And I really respected your emphasis on valuing the developmental goals, not just how much money American businesses made manufacturing in Haiti. And what can we do to make sure that all the effort we put into this doesn't end up lining the pockets of politicians and rather actually helps the middle class and actually helps address inequality?
Thank you so much, Mr. Beyer. I think in the AGOA criteria, there's a corruption criterion, and I think we ought to consider whether that's an appropriate criterion for all of the programs, part of GSP. Part of reviewing all of these criteria shows us that the GSP criteria were originally conceived in 1974, but then by the time we got to AGOA, we had a lot more experience with these programs, and we saw more of the things that we thought we ought to be promoting. So I think as part of a broader reconsideration of these programs, we might think about some of the criteria that are actually in AGOA to address the concern you're expressing.
That's a very thoughtful answer. Thank you very much. Mr. Cook, we've heard how Haynes is, a key employer, the key employer in Haiti. You've invested a great deal in the community, but we've also heard about high levels of non-compliance with labor laws in many factories and low wages. What are the measures that you take with your partners to make sure that the labor rights are protected and that workers have a living wage?
Thank you for the questions. One, we own our operations as much as possible so we can make sure that what should happen happens and work with our employees and stakeholders. We are very big encouragers of better works and participate with them and encourage them. But the key really for Haiti, I would argue, going forward is to have more economic opportunity. It is that freedom of choice, the freedom to assemble, and the ability to be able to say, no, I'm not going to tolerate that. I'm going to be elsewhere. And so we have found that, owning the operation, investing in people, we put 1,800 people through high school graduation classes to give people knowledge and the ability to control their destiny and develop their future.
Great. Thank you very much. Ms. Stewart, thanks again for your testimony. And you recommended that compliance be linked with benefits. And that seems like a no-brainer, but has this been tried before, or why? Why has enforcement failed in the past? How do we make sure as we renew this that enforcement is successful now? And by the way, all of us build on what just happened in the USMCA on enforcement and labor rights.
Thank you for the question, Congressman Byer. So one of the reasons why the enforcement has not happened in a way that's been beneficial to workers is because it's not specified, I believe, in a degree that would allow there to be actual teeth. And so our union partners right now are debating various proposals, but a few that at least two unions have talked about is making sure that there's a specified amount of time that's built into the language of how long a factory is allowed to be out of non-compliance, right? And so the Better Work Report shows that some factories are out of compliance for years, and all they have to do is show up to a workshop on how to prevent or limit sexual harassment, and then the clock starts over. And so more stringent measures in terms of how long you can be out of non-compliance until your benefits are actually suspended, and there's real consequences or penalties, are what they believe will change behavior. Also, putting in measures, for example, that you can't be readmitted to the program until you've demonstrated that you are able to remedy the violation, making sure that the workers who've been harmed have been made whole, and then also limiting the number of times that a factory can be readmitted to the program if they've been suspended for ongoing noncompliance. So ensuring that there are teeth and real ramifications for ongoing noncompliance are critical measures.
So let me interrupt quickly on teeth, because I know Chairman Blumenauer, Jimmy Panetta, and others on this call were part of the team that negotiated USMCA with Ambassador Lighthizer. Should we be looking at those, the highest ever labor and environmental standards to be ultimately incorporated in the Caribbean Basin? Well, it sounds like perhaps a rhetorical question, but it'd be great to come back to that. Mr. Chairman, my time is up. So.
Thank you very much. Congressman Horsford.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for allowing me to participate today and for hosting this hearing on the Caribbean Basin Trade Partnership Act. As has been discussed since its inception, since 2000, the Cbtpa has played an important role in developing and facilitating trade between the United States and the Caribbean Basin. Extending the U.S. Cbtpa will also increase our nation's economic growth, as well as promote job creation and lay the foundation for long-term economic development. With this program up for renewal, it's very important, and it's also an opportunity for this committee to discuss any areas for improvement in future conversations, and I think we've covered that today. So I'm very grateful to the committee staff as well as the witnesses that have joined us today. When considering the renewal of the Cbtpa, we can agree that the United States must remain engaged. We have a long-standing commitment to the economic development of countries like Haiti and others within the region. And although my colleagues would argue that the United States running a positive surplus in trade in most countries within the region is a bonus, the reality is that by promoting U.S. investment in developing countries like Haiti, we have forgotten the long-term goal of improving the economic development of these countries. The programs currently in place can be seen as prioritizing holding returns for the U.S. businesses that invest in these countries rather than focusing on development and promotion. So on top of the effects of COVID-19 presently, labor rights are continuously, in my view, violated in forms of economic shocks, such as low wages, a climbing cost of living, lack of union representation, and job loss. Without the Cbtpa, more Haitians are finding themselves without work and families are left struggling. Ms. Baltson, earlier in your testimony, you commented that our programs do not directly promote the development of the middle class. We can agree that the goal of these preference programs must promote a more equitable and sustainable economy. However, I'd like for you to expand on the best way to ensure markets for U.S. exports in developing countries are more robust to support the middle class.
Thank you, Mr. Horsford. I think this goes exactly to what you were talking about, which is short-term versus long-term. And I think what we've got to do is build a middle class in these countries so that in the long term, they actually have the income to consume what we produce. So I think if we start looking at it through that framework instead of sort of immediately rewarding investment or immediately rewarding exports, I think we have a better chance of producing both the development we want, and then, of course, the benefits will inure to us when they have a greater ability to consume our goods.
Great. And Ms. Stewart, I'd like also to talk about issues that you raised in your testimony on labor rights. You mentioned that the U.S. Department of State's 2019 report on human rights practices for Haiti reported that the government required some factories to remedy labor violations related to freedom of association, yet the government did not effectively enforce the law. Do you believe that if the social political unrest within the country continues, that the labor rights will not improve?
Thank you for your question. I do believe that the social and political situation has created challenges, as has the lack of resources and funding for the Ministry of Labor and Social Affairs, which is responsible for conducting the inspections in the factories, which is one of the other reasons why it's very important to have the Better Work program there, monitoring conditions on a regular basis. But as the government is further stressed, there is a challenge related to ensuring that the laws are enforced and properly managed.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And then finally, Ambassador Dennis, I'd like to thank you for being here today and for sharing your thoughts on the renewal of the Caribbean Basic Trade Partnership Act. Do you believe that the pandemic has had a negative impact on the economic development in Haiti? If so, how?
Thank you, Congressman, for your question. Definitely, they have a negative impact all over the world. Haiti, as a weak economy, is impacting because we are exporting goods to the United States to the Cbtpa, the garment industry, and it's impacted in the United States, and that has the negative effect also in Haiti. We try quickly to convert in producing PPE. So, but this is maybe the opportunity for us, maybe to produce for the US a PPE material. So, but definitely this is a worldwide crisis, the COVID-19. And in Haiti, obviously, we pay the price now.
Thank you all very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your leadership, and to my colleagues.
Thank you very much, Mr. Horsford. Congresswoman Del Bene.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and just want to say thank you to all of our witnesses for joining us today. We appreciate your time and your insight. I have a question for Ms. Baltzan. I understand the importance of preference programs like Cbtpa, and I agree with you that they need to be reimagined to fit broader development goals. For example, the USAID said that only a quarter of Haiti's population has access to electricity, and the lack of reliability requires many businesses and households to install costly, inefficient, and environmentally unfriendly diesel generators. So in order to address challenges like this, I wondered what your thoughts are on whether we should pair preference programs like Cbtpa with other initiatives, maybe something modeled on Power Africa that sought to double access to electricity in sub-Saharan Africa. Should we use the newly established International Development Finance Corporation to scale up investments in things like healthcare and education and microfinance and other sectors? Just love your thoughts on that generally.
Thank you so much, Ms. Delbeni. I think that's exactly right. We had a lot of difficulty when we were renewing AGOA in 2015. We knew we could do, especially with this committee, we knew we could deal with the trade preferences, but I think a lot of us felt that we wanted to do more on infrastructure. And of course, that's expensive. It's not something we were able to do when we were renewing the program back then. And I think if we look at what's important in these countries, it really is it's what you're describing. It's infrastructure, it's ports. And to be candid, China's spending a lot of money in these countries. And I think we've got to pair our preference programs with a real commitment to building some of the core important aspects of these economies.
Do you have particular things you think we can model on?
If I may, I would like to give that thought and respond to you in a QFR if I can, so I can give you a good answer.
Okay, no, thanks. I appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you. Dr. Weinstrup, thank you for your leadership on this, and thank you for joining our subcommittee today.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's a pleasure to be with everyone today. And I just want to start by thanking Terry Sewell for the opportunity to work with her on this and for her leadership. It's always a pleasure to work with her. I think, I want to deal with so many things here today, but Cbtpa, I believe, is good for us and good for our Caribbean neighbors, which I think is very important. And I think it's important that we have a reliable U.S. partner and also to help grow the economy of our allies in the region. In my particular district, we have the CNTOS, the uniform people. They also make first aid equipment for industry as well as fire equipment, et cetera. But Haiti is a big partner for CNTOS in the uniform industry. And I think it's critical to show that the U.S. has a commitment to the region and to help build the economies. And I think Congress can be of help with that by reauthorizing this agreement until 2030. But let me go to my questions. One for Mr. Cook. If you could just give me a little idea of how the Cbtpa will help foster or enhance the ties not only between U.S. companies and suppliers in the Caribbean, but the United States and the nations in the Caribbean.
Certainly. Thank you, sir, and you, Mrs. Sewell, for your leadership on this bill and the renewal. The probably best seen two ways. One is these nations, Haiti, Dominican, Jamaica, the others that are there, they're a third border. And having continuity of economic partnerships with them keeps them economically viable. And that's probably the most important aspect to the U.S. by far, is to have a very strong economic partnership to have healthy neighbors. The second is by having this engagement through Cbtpa, it encourages investments, both from companies and individuals and NGOs to be active and to help have, very thriving and successful individual lives. And from just being there for the last 30 years, I can just tell you firsthand, if we lose that continuity, we lose a very important border and a very important neighbor.
Well, I appreciate that. My next question is for you, Ambassador Denis. Can you discuss whether you believe that this agreement has contributed to the development of Haiti, but also what are some changes you would want to make to the program to help Haiti realize its full potential?
Oh, thank you, Congressman. That definitely the Cbtpa helped Haiti to create more jobs. We need much more for the development. We need to develop infrastructure. We need to develop a lot of other issues. We need to develop a legal framework. We need to develop our institution. Talking about the union, talking about any kind of aspect of the society. All those issues are major issues for us and should be also for United States as a good partner of Haiti. Better we have educated people, better they can be the better partners. So This is why we are working hardly to attract investment, not only in the framework of the Cbtpa, but also in investment, like infrastructure investment, like port investment, like airport, like tourism. We are a place rich of potential in tourism. So we keep working, and we hope the support of the Congress to expand the range of action you have in Haiti. The Cbtpa is essential because it creates easy job, where the people need a minimum of knowledge, but we need after that to better the quality of the job to create, other job. And this is the way, like I said, and I'll continue to say it, to create stability in the country, in the whole region.
Thank you very much. I yield back, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the time.
You're on mute, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, you're on mute. I think he may have dismissed us. Is Vern on? Can Vern dismiss us?
So this is George, and I'm standing in for Vern. And as the standing in ranking member, adjourn the hearing. Thank the witnesses.
Thank you all. Thank the witnesses. Thank you all. And thank you so much, colleagues.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Great hearing.